You are standing in a stone hallway in Castile, Spain, 1492. It is 2 in the morning. There is a knock at your door, and you already know what it means. You reach the door before your husband does. 2 men stand in the dark. They wear no armour. They carry no weapons you can see. They are familiares, lay officers of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, and they have a document with your son's name on it. They do not show you the document. They do not explain the charge. Your son is 17 years old. He is still pulling on his boots when they take him through the door. You do not scream. You have been warned, by women who survived this before you, never to scream. This is a true story. It happened to thousands of families across Spain during the peak decades of the Inquisition, and the part that history forgot is the part that will destroy you. On the floor behind you, slid under the door some time before the knock, lies a folded letter, sealed, unsigned. You do not pick it up. You are afraid that reading it will make you responsible for what it knows. Your husband appears at the top of the stairs. You raise one hand. Not yet. He understands. You have rehearsed this silence together, the way other families rehearse prayers. You lower yourself to the floor beside the letter, your back against the cold wall, and you wait. The candle guttered out an hour ago. The wax has pooled and hardened on the windowsill from a previous night of waiting, because this is not the first time you have waited, only the first time they have come for someone you made with your own body. You have 48 hours before they call you to testify, and what you say in that room will either save your son or condemn your husband. Here is what the textbooks leave out. Castile in 1492 was not simply a place where heretics were hunted. It was a place where an entire legal architecture had been constructed to make families the instrument of their own destruction. The Spanish Inquisition had been formally established 14 years earlier, in 1478, under a papal bull from Sixtus IV. By 1484, Tomás de Torquemada, its first Grand Inquisitor, had written the foundational procedural codes known as the Instrucciones. Those codes contained a provision so precise in its cruelty that historians are still untangling its consequences 5 centuries later. The accused were never told who had denounced them. Not the name, not the motive, not even the nature of the accusation with any specificity. You were brought into a sealed room and told only that you were suspected of heresy, and then you were asked, as an act of spiritual cooperation, to name anyone you knew who had committed similar sins. Refusal to name accomplices was itself treated as evidence of guilt. The institution had constructed a closed loop: confess and name others, or your silence becomes your confession. Scholars now understand that this single procedural provision, anonymous accusation combined with compelled denunciation, was not an accident of design. It was the engine. The Inquisition did not need to break every family by force. It only needed to create conditions in which families would break each other, legally, voluntarily, and with the best of intentions. If this is the version of history they never taught you, the machinery behind the myth, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The story we're about to finish will not let you go. We have not yet told you what the accused were required to do next. That is where it gets worse. The inquisitorial trial had no defense attorney. There was no advocate, no witness you could call, no document you were permitted to read. You sat across a plain table from an inquisitor and a notary, and the notary's quill was already moving before you spoke your first word. The institution called this process mercy. Here is how the mercy worked. According to the Directorium Inquisitorum, the operational manual written by Inquisitor Nicholas Aymeric in 1376 and still in active use a century later, the accused were to be given 3 formal warnings before any escalation, 3 chances to cooperate, 3 opportunities to demonstrate spiritual sincerity by confessing voluntarily and naming those who had sinned alongside them. Aymeric described this structure as compassionate. He was not lying, he genuinely believed it, and that sincerity made the system more lethal than cruelty alone could have achieved, because a cruel institution can be identified and resisted. An institution that believes it is saving your soul generates a paralysis that cruelty cannot touch. Under Torquemada's Instrucciones, the legal presumption was explicit. Heresy travelled through households. If one member of a family practiced forbidden rites, the tribunal assumed, procedurally, structurally, that others knew. A husband's confession implicated a wife's silence implicated a husband, a child's testimony became evidence about a parent. None of the family members were ever placed in the same room, none of them knew what the others had said. The tribunal compared their statements in private, and every contradiction between testimonies became new evidence requiring further examination. Contemporary legal scholars who have studied the Vatican archive records describe the same pattern across dozens of cases in Castile and Aragon. The most devastating denunciations did not come from the first session, they came from the second and third, after the accused had sat alone with their uncertainty long enough that cooperation began to feel indistinguishable from survival. The Inquisition's most powerful instrument was not the rack, it was paperwork, and the terror of not knowing what your family had already said about you. The Carafa Family Tribunal, records from Rome, dated 1567 to 1570, document 4 members of a single extended household interrogated in separate sealed sessions on 4 successive nights. Although the inquisitors cross-referenced each session against the others, without ever allowing the family members to confront one another, the records show that by the 4th night, each of the 4 had named at least one other family member, not because they had been subjected to physical coercion, but because each had been told, quietly, that others had already provided testimony. This was sometimes true. Inquisitorial procedure explicitly permitted it to be a lie. She is called to the tribunal hall the same afternoon her son is taken. Late light Castile, she walks through a door she has passed 100 times and enters a room she has never seen. There is no window. The cross on the wall is positioned behind the inquisitor, not facing her. The notary does not look up. The inquisitor's first question is not about her son, it is about her morning prayers. Specifically, which direction she faces, and whether she washes her hands before or after. She understands in the space of one breath. This is not an inquiry into her son, this is an inquiry into her. She begins to calculate, rapidly, silently, what her husband may have said before her, what her son may have let slip in the hours since dawn, what the neighbour heard through the shared wall last Friday evening. Every answer she gives is simultaneously a guess about what answers have already been recorded. Yet she names no one, she is dismissed. In the corridor outside, behind a door she has never seen open, she hears a voice she has known for 18 years. Her husband. She cannot tell if he is confessing or being questioned. The distinction will determine everything. Historians who have spent years inside the Vatican secret archive describe a consistent pattern across the surviving tribunal records, and it is not what popular memory has preserved. The mythology of the Inquisition hardened around its most visible horrors: the bonfire, the dungeon, the hooded figure presiding over public spectacle. That mythology was not entirely false, but it was strategically incomplete. Because the spectacle drew every eye toward the exceptional and made the procedural machinery, the part that ran every day in sealed rooms, against ordinary families, effectively invisible. What the records actually show is this: the majority of familial denunciations were voluntary, not coerced in the physical sense, voluntary in the precise legal meaning the institution required, which is to say, the accused chose to name family members after being subjected to a formal structure designed to make that choice feel inevitable. The monitio canonica, the canonical warning issued 3 times before escalation, was the instrument. Each warning carried the same implicit message: cooperation now will be weighed in your favour. Silence is being read as guilt. Time is becoming your enemy. Contemporary case notes from inquisitors across Castile describe their own distress when the accused refused to cooperate, framed not as frustration, but as grief. One inquisitor's records note that a woman's continued silence caused him to fear for her soul. The institution had made coercion and mercy functionally identical. You could not tell them apart from the inside. The Carafa records show something more specific. In the 3rd session of the eldest son's interrogation, the inquisitor mentioned, but without elaboration, that a family member had provided testimony raising questions about his conduct on a specific evening 2 years prior. The son had no way to verify this. He spent one night alone with the uncertainty. In his fourth session, he named his father. She is called back 2 days after her first session. Dawn, Castile, the same sealed room. This time the Inquisitor mentions her daughter. She returns that night to a house that feels reconfigured. The furniture is where it was. The door latches the same way. But the rooms have acquired new meaning. Each one a place where a conversation could have been overheard. Each window a potential witness. Each wall a surface that memory has already pressed its ear against. The letter is still on the floor where it landed. She picks it up. She reads it. And here the story breaks open entirely. The letter is not from the Inquisition. It is not a summons or a warrant or an official notice of any kind. It is from her sister-in-law, her husband's sister, living 2 streets north. And what it contains is a confession that reorders everything that has happened since the knock at the door. The sister-in-law had filed the denunciation against her own brother's household, not from hatred, not from malice, from calculation and from terror, and from a precise understanding of how the institution rewarded those who came forward before being named. Inquisitorial procedure was explicit on this point. Voluntary denouncers who presented themselves before being identified by another witness received reduced scrutiny. The sister-in-law had been threatened by a neighbour. She had chosen her own survival, and in choosing it, had tried to control the damage, filing a limited denunciation rather than waiting for someone else to file a devastating one. She had, in her own broken way, attempted to protect them. The sealed letter was not a mystery. It was a confession wrapped in an apology that the system had made unspeakable until now. Everything from the cold open reassembles. The knock was not an enemy. The letter was not a threat from outside. The first blow had come from someone who loved them, because the institution had constructed conditions in which love, exercised under pressure, becomes the sharpest available instrument. Her second session is at dawn. She has not slept. She is composing, in the dark, a version of truth that protects everyone. And she knows with cold clarity that no such version exists. The Inquisition did not present itself as a machine of punishment. It presented itself as a machine of salvation. This distinction is not semantic. It is the key to understanding why the institution was so difficult to survive psychologically, and why its records show so many accused individuals ultimately cooperating with the very process, dismantling them. Inquisitorial theology held that heresy was a spiritual disease. The tribunal's role was not to punish the infected, but to cure them before the infection spread, confess, cooperate, demonstrate genuine contrition, and the church would receive you back. You would be reconciled, restored, saved. Contemporary inquisitors' case notes, including those associated with the tribunal of Pedro de Arbues in Aragon, describe this framing with complete sincerity. These were not cynical men performing mercy as theatre. They believed it, and a system operated by people who genuinely believe they are rescuing you produces a particular kind of psychological devastation that naked cruelty cannot replicate. Because cruelty can be hated, and hatred sustains resistance. Salvation cannot be hated, it can only be surrendered to. The doctrine of reconciliation carried a precise and permanent price. Reconciled individuals, those officially forgiven and restored to the church, were barred from public office. They could not serve as priests, lawyers, physicians, or guild officials. Their children inherited the restriction. Under the Limpieza de Sangre statutes, blood purity laws that spread through Spanish institutions across the 16th century, the descendants of reconciled individuals were excluded from honourable professions for 2 full generations. While the institution's mercy was its most strategically constructed offer, survival meant reclassification, forgiveness meant permanent marking. The woman in our story understood this. She sat in the dark composing her testimony, and what she was really composing was a calculation about which form of destruction her family could most survive. The auto da fe, the act of faith, was not a private proceeding. It was a public ceremony, held in the plaza, attended by the community, witnessed by neighbours who had known these families for decades. Sentences were read aloud. Penitents stood before the assembled crowd in the San Benito. A rough yellow robe marked with symbols indicating the nature of the offence and the terms of reconciliation. You wore it in public. Everyone saw. Everyone was meant to see. A mob being seen watching was a form of civic participation. Contemporary observers noted, and this detail survives in multiple accounts, that being seen not watching could itself attract attention. She stands in the plaza in late morning light, her daughter's hand in hers, the coarse fabric of the San Benito against her skin. Her husband stands beside her, similarly robed. Their son, 17, taken on the first night, stands slightly apart. He was released without formal sentence. Too young, the tribunal determined, to have been a conscious participant. He is staring at the ground. The sister-in-law is not present. Her case is ongoing. The inquisitor reads the sentence. The notary records the community's witness. At the edge of the plaza, a tribunal scribe places a sealed document into a leather case and closes the latch. It is the transcript of her second session. What she said in that room, whether she protected her sister-in-law or surrendered her, is now preserved in permanent record. We know what she said. The archive still exists. We are not telling you yet. The ceremony ends. The family turns and walks home through streets they have walked their entire lives. They do not speak. Their neighbours watch them go. The daughter does not let go of her mother's hand. Abon de San Benito was not retired after the ceremony. In most tribunal jurisdictions across Castile and Aragon, the robes, or a replica bearing the penitent's name, was hung permanently inside the local parish church. It remained there for decades, sometimes generations. Every person who entered to pray walked past it. Every child born into that community grew up knowing that name, that family, that marking. The institution had engineered a form of social memory that required no maintenance because the community itself became its custodian. The practical consequences were immediate and compounding. A reconciled merchant could not renew trading licenses in certain guilds. His son, released without formal sentence, but nonetheless carried the family's tribunal record into every future background inquiry, and background inquiries were standard procedure for any position of civic standing. The Limpieza de Sangre statutes did not require a second conviction. The first record was sufficient. It followed the bloodline forward in time the way the institution claimed heresy did, invisibly, presumptively, permanently. The sister-in-law was reconciled the following year. Her own second and third sessions had produced testimony naming 3 additional individuals. 2 were distant cousins of the original family. The archive records this without commentary. The institution recorded outcomes, not regret. And the woman, our witness, the one who stood barefoot on a stone floor watching a door close over her son, named no one in her second session. The transcript is preserved. She told the inquisitor she did not know the identity of her denouncer. The record notes the inquisitor found this answer insufficient. It also notes he found it, at that time, not actionable. He marked the file accordingly. The word he used was suspensor, suspended, not exonerated, not closed, suspended, which meant the Holy Office retained the right to reopen the case at any moment it judged appropriate for the remainder of her natural life. She would have known this. She walked out of that building carrying it. Like the Spanish Inquisition was officially abolished in 1834. When Napoleon's forces briefly opened the tribunal archives to outside scholars in 1808, what those scholars encountered was not primarily a record of executions. It was hundreds of thousands of pages of procedural transcripts, denunciations, cross-referenced testimonies, canonical warnings, reconciliation terms, maintained with the precision of a legal institution that understood its own paperwork as its most durable instrument. The bonfires had consumed bodies. The archive had consumed families, and the archive survived. The blood purity statutes crossed the Atlantic. The Inquisition operated in Mexico City, in Cartagena, in Lima, well into the 18th century. The procedural architecture, anonymous accusation, compelled denunciation, suspended files, all permanent marking, became a template. The families it was tested on were long dead. The machine they were broken by was copied, adapted, and carried forward by institutions that never used the word Inquisition. In the Vatican collection, there is a folder tied with a deteriorating ribbon, labelled with a family name, never formally closed. Among its contents is a sealed letter, logged as evidence and never opened. Whatever it contained was apparently rendered irrelevant before anyone read it. By the time it arrived, the family had already done the institution's work for it. The letter is still sealed, the archive is still open. The Inquisition did not need to read every letter, it only needed families to believe that it had, and to act accordingly. That is how an institution dismantles love without laying a hand on it. It makes love into a liability, it makes silence into evidence, it makes the people who know you best into the most dangerous witnesses against you. That is the history they compressed into bonfires and forgot. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the walls of that system closing, share it with someone who thinks they already know this history, and subscribe, because the stories we tell here are the ones the official record quietly hoped you would never find.